everyone. Thanks so much for joining this keynote lecture, which is going to be about artificial intelligence in education and how to succeed in the new reality. And we're kind of starting as we mean to go on, because the image that you can see on the slide now is actually an artificial intelligence generated artwork using a piece of software called DALL-E 2. And you'll see that picture being used on the cover of a new publication coming out from UNESCO in September on artificial intelligence and higher education. So we start as we mean to go on. My name's Dr. Emma Sabzalieva. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University in Canada, and until recently was the lead of a project on artificial intelligence and higher education at UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education. I'm an international higher education specialist with over 2 decades of expertise in teaching, research, policy analysis, consultancy and university administration spanning 3 continents, including Central Asia. So in this lecture today, we're going to start by covering some basics and talk about what is artificial intelligence. Then we'll focus a bit on how AI can be used in learning, teaching and assessment. We'll look at some key challenges for AI in education. We'll try to think about the future of AI and education. And at the end, I'm going to deal with some of the great questions that you posed ahead of the conference. And in fact, many of the other questions and issues that you brought up are going to be dealt with along the way during the presentation. So thank you again if you did pose a question, and I hope you'll find that in the course of the presentation that your question has been answered. So let's begin and talk about what is artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, because it keeps things flexible, there isn't a universally accepted definition of artificial intelligence. UNESCO in 2019 published a report that says that machines based on AI are potentially capable of imitating or exceeding human cognitive capacities, including sensing language interaction, reasoning and analysis, problem solving, and even creativity. The other thing that UNESCO says about artificial intelligence is the importance of keeping this definition flexible, given that artificial intelligence, or AI, is developing so rapidly. So artificial intelligence is already around us, and some of the common applications that we might find in human life today begin with virtual assistants, for example. So if you have Siri or Alexa or other tools like that, these use machine learning to learn from their mistakes and provide better recommendations and predictions to their users. Another common example, which we'll talk more about in the context of learning and teaching, is chatbots. These are software that interacts or chats with users in a conversational type manner. Those of you who use social media will probably know or have seen tailor-made recommendations coming out based on your previous pattern of usage. That rests on AI. Social media platforms use these tools to learn from users' interactions with their platforms and find out more about their preferences. So for example, if you've ever used Netflix to watch a video and you've seen that it says, okay, if you like this, then you might like this. That's a recommendation that's driven by AI technology. We also see in semi-autonomous driving as another example of AI. Self-driving cars haven't yet become mainstream, but that's another area in which we're starting to see more and more use in everyday life, again, powered by AI technology. Virtual reality and augmented reality are tools that aren't yet mainstream, but of course draw from artificial intelligence tools. I'll say a little bit more about those again in the context of education shortly. And then the nascent metaverse and multiverse is another way that we're seeing AI being applied, and those might be terms that you've come across as well. So those are some of the common applications of AI. So what's driving this recent interest in AI? For a start, we can look at research and knowledge production about artificial intelligence. In 2021 alone, 500,000 publications on AI were recorded. And between 2015 and 2021, there was a growth of 30 times in the number of patents that were registered in this knowledge domain. It's not only research, but algorithmic advances. There isn't artificial intelligence without algorithms. These are the things that power how the technology works. And so we see in tandem with that exponential increases in computing power and data storage mean that algorithms not only have become more complex, but there's more storage and space available to host those algorithms. And of course, the financing. Investment, particularly in the private sector, has increased exponentially, a 30-time increase over the period 2011 to 2021. And that aligns to the fact that business investment is dominating research and development on artificial intelligence and has done so in recent years. That being said, governments are increasing their investments in artificial intelligence research. In Singapore, for example, we found an investment of US $150 million. In the UK, $355 million was invested between 2017 and 2018. At around that time, the European Union doubled its funding for artificial intelligence. And by 2030, the potential contribution of AI to the global economy is estimated at US $15.7 trillion. So driving the recent interest and also some of the outcomes of that increased interest in AI. I think it's also really important to remember that data fuels artificial intelligence. Without data, we can't have artificial intelligence operating. So data is like a kind of fuel. In some ways, you've probably heard a comparison that oil is like data as it comes to artificial intelligence. AI needs enormous amounts of data to learn from it and provide services based on it. But where does that data come from? Some of these might surprise you. So data can be collected from mobile phones, from cell phones, from smartwatches, from social media platforms, from online shopping websites, from security systems, from learning management systems, and even if you have a thermostat in your house to regulate temperature, that can also be a source of data from which AI can be developed. There are other sources of data too, of course. And I've got so far in the presentation without even mentioning ChatGPT, which is perhaps the main reason that public interest has been sparked when it comes to artificial intelligence, particularly over the last year. And you can see on the screen a selection of headlines about both the excitement and the fear, perhaps, that ChatGPT has brought about in recent months in the media. ChatGPT is a language model. It allows people to interact with a computer in a more natural and conversational way. The GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and that means it's considered a form of generative artificial intelligence because of the way it can produce original results. It uses natural language processing to learn from internet data and provide answers to questions or prompts. And so, as mentioned, ChatGPT gets its data from the internet. So it's been trained from the corpus of data mainly written in English, but also in some other languages as well. It's been trained on large text databases, so it learns to predict the next word in a sentence. That's how the tool has been set up. And it generates a coherent and compelling human-like output in response to a question or statement. It has around 175 billion parameters. That's in the current free version, ChatGPT 3.5. And that draws from 570 gigabytes of data, which represents 300 billion words, or about 1.3 million books. So it's got a lot of information that it's been trained on. So that takes us through a little bit about what actually we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence. And what I'd like to do now is think about how that has been and could be applied in education, in learning, in teaching, and in assessment. So let me start by talking about personalized learning. Now, personalized learning isn't something that's new. You're probably well aware of the idea of personalized learning to provide students and teachers with more individualized feedback. But using AI tools, we can really see an uptick in the way that we can offer personalized learning in education. And that can be used to, for example, provide immediate feedback, make recommendations, adapt assessments, identify learning styles and patterns, and even to measure student performance. So here's an example of how personalized learning can help with making recommendations. So in this case, from higher education, Georgia State University, an American university, created a predictive algorithm drawing from data and using this AI tool that would flag students who signed up for courses which were outside of areas that could contribute to their declared majors. So in the US system, that would be their main area of study. These flag also identified if the courses that students had selected might undermine their performance in the courses that do then support their major. And what happened then was, having made that alert using technology, it then brought in human intervention. So it allowed for meetings between students and their academic advisors to find possible course alternatives. So in this way, the AI tool was able to recommend other tasks to support learners' goals and/or to achieve their competencies. And I think this first example, and I'll give several others in the presentation as well, also really reminds us of the importance of humans in this process. It's very easy to get caught up in the hype around artificial intelligence and imagine that, for example, robots are going to take our jobs, or suddenly this unknown kind of amorphous idea about technology will take over and there won't be any need for humans. In fact, actually, it's quite the opposite. And what we can see from here is not only that humans design how AI works, but it's humans who should be in control and who should be harnessing how that technology is used, as the example here from Georgia State University provides. Another way that we can use artificial intelligence in learning and teaching is through intelligent tutoring systems. These are computer-based systems that leverage AI to provide personalized, adaptive instruction that mirrors the benefits of one-on-one tutoring. And you can see on the slide here a graphic showing how that data is collected and the interaction between the student, represented by the figure on the right of the screen, and the data that's collected about the student, and then how that can interact not only with that information, with the course information, the knowledge domain, teaching strategies, and then sort of looping back into then how that works to better support the student in this way. So intelligent tutoring systems can support personalized learning paths for students. They can provide the ability to monitor students in real time and provide assistance when needed. They can diversify the range of customized learning resources, and they have the capability to manage the interactive and personalized elements of individual learning. Here are a couple of examples. So in India, Amrita University's Amachi Labs have developed an ITS, an intelligent tutoring system, to support vocational education and learning. And the Open University in the UK has developed a tool called Open Essayist. This is an ITS that's designed to provide students with feedback on their draft essays. So perhaps that starts to trigger for you some ideas about how these tools could help with some of the tasks involved in the learning and teaching process. In the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see how to date, in which subject areas to date ITS have been predominantly used, and that's mainly in the STEM field, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. The use so far in art and languages, in business studies and social sciences is much lower. Now, that was based on a systematic review completed in 2022. As these technologies become more widely available, we might start to see those subject areas shift around as well. But until now, we see this predominance in engineering, science, health science, and mathematics. So we've talked about personalized learning. We've gone over what is an intelligent tutoring system and how that could work. Now let's talk about chatbots and how they can support learning. And you'll see several examples of chatbots. These are one of the most accessible ways for people in education to interact with artificial intelligence tools, whether that's through the development of chatbots, which can even be done without any coding, or it's through the use of chatbots. So in the case that you can see here, AI-powered chatbots can reply to students' inquiries, redirect them to the right content and resources, meanwhile replicating human-like conversation. So there's a couple of screenshots here from the University of Bolton, a British university, which developed a chatbot called Ada. And to date, Ada has delivered personalized learning and assessment for 70,000 students, as well as answering questions about curriculum content and attendance requirements. So perhaps those of you who are working in higher education, perhaps in admissions functions, this might be a really nice way to be able to scale the delivery of inquiry information to applicants, perhaps even to students who are studying as well. Chatbots can also support teaching. Another example from the US here, perhaps one of the most famous chatbots that's been used in higher education, Georgia Institute of Technology created a chatbot, or a professor at the university created a chatbot called Jill Watson, which can respond to students' basic questions through the bot without necessarily the students knowing that it was software. Now, that wasn't trying to manipulate the students, but at the beginning of the course, the professor who was actually teaching a course in the area of computer science wanted to see how well received and how human-like this chatbot could be. So the professor only revealed that it was a chatbot at the end of the semester. And again, you can see on the right side of the screen a sample screenshot of a student interacting with Jill Watson, asking, in this case, how long an assignment should be. Should it be 1,000 words or 2,000 words? And then the response that's automatically generated by the chatbot, and then so on and so forth. So you see it looks a little bit like a conversation style. So since Jill Watson chatbot was developed, it's also been rolled out now to be applicable for other courses. So although at the outset it required considerable time and resource investment for its initial development, once it was created, its adaptation to new courses could be done only in a matter of a few hours. And I also want to talk about chatbots as a way of improving student services, not just learning and teaching. So here, because chatbots can be available all the time, they can give instant replies any time of the day, any day of the week. Now, of course, if they need to refer a student or a member of staff or a member of the public to a human, that would have to be done during their working hours. But in the meantime, this could be a great start. So students, for example, in this case, can pose questions, and then the chatbot can be designed to adapt the answer to the specific situation. So here we have an example from Peru in South America. Continental University developed a bot called ContiBot, which provides information about timetables, grades, and other academic information in real time. Now, for this university, that's been particularly efficient because they have over 60,000 students spread across 4 campuses, 3 of which are located in small and medium cities in the Andes, a mountainous region of the country. So you can imagine then as well the possibility that we could think about artificial intelligence to support access to information, to resources, in this case, for current students, those who are already studying. So let's move on to virtual and augmented reality. Now, these could be used as interactive tools to support more personalized, practical, interactive and immersive learning experiences. And they could also improve distance learning. The picture that you can see here is some students working on a skeleton using virtual reality as well to increase the experience that they're having there. Augmented reality requires less technology. It's a little bit cheaper to organize because it doesn't require all these different tech and resources. AR can be done through a person's mobile phone, for example. So although VR and AR are not currently used very widely in education, certainly not in higher education, I think we might see increased use, particularly when it comes to augmented reality. And here we have an example from Canada. Mohawk College has been delivering learning modules using AR, augmented reality, for some technician courses, in this case because students have been unable to relocate to the campus for family or financial reasons. So here again we see an example of how AI could be used to expand access to education, and that might be particularly relevant in the context of countries where there's a large rural population, or perhaps there are many mountainous regions where otherwise getting to and from might be difficult for students or for teachers. So in that way, there are also other ways that artificial intelligence tools can help to increase learner inclusion and well-being. So just think about voice recognition, transcription, real-time captioning, subtitles, translation. All of that could help, for example, students with hearing difficulties. In the US, the University of California, San Diego uses a tool called Era to deliver real-time visual descriptions for people who are blind or have low vision. In Peru, again, the National University of San Marcos has developed a tool that broadcasts the news of the university in the Quechua language. Now that's significant because Quechua is spoken by about 25% of the population in Peru, but in universities, 0% of the teaching is done in Quechua. All of the teaching is done in Spanish. So by creating this tool that can speak and transmit information in one of the important languages in the country, we're expanding the inclusiveness of our educational systems and our educational processes. And the other example that I want to share in terms of well-being comes from Malaysia, where the Multimedia University of Malaysia developed a tool called Chat With Me, a chatbot that aims to identify the emotions of the user based on the words that they're using and inputting, as well as who might be at risk of suicide, and provide them with resources to help them connect, in this case, of course, to a human who could support them in those difficult times. So that's a bit of an overview of how we might think about using AI tools in learning and teaching processes. But what about assessment? That seems to be a really important area. A survey that was completed earlier this year of 464 people said that AI will probably have the greatest impact on testing and assessment. 75% of the respondents said that the main reason to adopt AI in higher education is to improve learner outcomes. So when it comes to assessment, AI tools could help to track student performance and identify learning patterns, for example, why a student is or isn't progressing. It can be used to assign grades in real time and offer filters to recommend materials that could help improve grades. And it could ensure that what has been learned is remembered in the long term, scheduling refresher exercises, for example, along the way as part of the monitoring process. So again, let me give a couple of examples of how AI tools could be used in the assessment process to monitor academic progress. So first, based on research that was done by researchers in Malaysia and Oman, they used a set of data that was available on the student record to create a machine learning algorithm that helped to identify students whose final results might be unsatisfactory. So the data that they used include the student's cumulative GPA or grade point average, their attendance, their grades from their first exam, as well as their grades from other prerequisite courses. And what that algorithm enabled the researchers to do was to identify students who might be at risk and allow the instructors of those courses to provide personalized support. And you can imagine in a large class scenario, for example, that could be a really helpful way for the instructor to know how to best use the limited time they have available to support the students who are most at risk. And similarly, a university in Colombia used an AI tool with aggregated data to identify which levels of early academic underperformance and other variables correlated with a higher chance of dropout. And they did so using a tool that had 93% accuracy. So again, given that in many countries the dropout rate, the non-completion rate in higher education is very high, using an AI tool like this to come in and create an early intervention could be very helpful both for the student, but also for the educational institution that is trying to help that student do the very best that they can. So the examples that I've given throughout this section do seem to suggest a lot of promise for artificial intelligence technologies and tools in education. I just want to make sure, though, before we move on, that we're aware of some of the limitations on using AI in student evaluation. Now, I think we're probably aware as instructors, as people who work in education, that education is all about people and it's all about supporting them and them in their communities and in their environments. So in that way, we can't reduce education to a set of purely quantitative variables and methods. We also need to be mindful of the fact that over-reliance on AI or indeed any other technology can lead to solutions that are oriented towards the technology rather than pedagogy. And that's particularly the case if, for example, we're not considering the learner outcomes and the learning outcomes of courses and programs when we're entering the technology or adding the technology into the educational offer. And so I've mentioned it before, and I'm going to say it again because it's a very important point. AI-based tools can be helpful for monitoring, for reinforcing the consolidation of learning, for helping to make learning more personalized. They aren't a substitute for human professors or for human teachers. What they can be at best is an aid or a tool that can support the humans who are at the heart of the educational process. Let's also talk now about some other key challenges for AI and education. And here we're going to step back and think first about this on a global scale. Now, we probably heard about the digital divide. I think it's also fair to say that there's a global AI divide. And that starts with the fact that there's a structural inequality of access to the infrastructure that's needed to support AI, whether that's access to the internet, access to electricity, availability of devices, or other reasons as well. And in a similar way, there's an uneven distribution of teaching, learning, and research on artificial intelligence between countries. And we've seen, for example, in higher education, that higher education institutions, or HEIs in the global north, are integrating AI faster than their counterparts in the global south. And we also see a pattern where countries with the highest GDP invest more in research and development in AI than in other places. So those are some key considerations, I think, as we, again, consider how useful or effective artificial intelligence can be or will be for us as we move forward in education. We also need to bear in mind there are some really important inclusion and diversity issues, because only by fostering a truly diverse and inclusive environment, particularly in subjects related to science, technology, engineering, and maths, can the creation of AI systems that are fair, unbiased, and effectively serve all segments of society be ensured. And we know that these STEM fields have been historically dominated by men. We know, for example, that the participation of women in AI-related academic research is significantly lower than men. We also know that traditionally these fields have been dominated by a relatively homogeneous group, so predominantly male as noted, and largely of certain ethnic backgrounds. That's particularly the case in larger multi-ethnic countries. So you see here, for example, that in India, students from marginalized social groups are significantly underrepresented in Indian institutes of technology. And in Brazil, students who choose to pursue STEM subjects are typically of higher socio-economic standing. So we need to be very mindful of these diversity experiences, and we need to address them in, for example, the admissions criteria to education, in the way that we work with women and with people from minority ethnic groups to ensure their inclusion and welcome into fields which are going to be producing the future AI developers and the future AI specialists. Without the diversity of the life experiences, we also lack diversity in how AI tools are developed, which I'm going to say just a little bit more about now in relation to data bias and privacy. So, as I've mentioned, artificial intelligence relies on data as its fuel. Without data, there isn't artificial intelligence. So it requires us to have an understanding then of how data sets are created. Data sets, at the end of the day, are created by humans. The way that data is labeled to feed into these data sets is a human activity. And that also reminds us of the side point that we have to consider the working conditions of those who are doing the data labeling. Often people are working in very precarious environments at that time. We also have to think about who those data labelers are and how they may replicate existing biases when they are doing the labeling. And therefore, if we have biased data going into the data set, it only stands to reason that an AI tool, which has no sentience and no sense of consciousness, will also produce bias in the results that it gives. So in that way, we also have to think not only about how those data sets are created, but how they're used. So one study, for example, found that only 12 data sets were used in more than 50% of academic papers on machine learning. That's a very small number. Not only that, but 10 of those 12 databases were developed in the USA, one in Germany and one in Hong Kong. So again, if we think about the range and the diversity of experiences and information and ideas which are in the data sets, this suggests that currently that's quite limited. And as I've mentioned, because AI tools collect information from databases, they are taught in this way to carry the same cognitive bias as comes through in the data. Another important point when we're thinking about data, and another challenge here, is to ensure data security and privacy. We need to think about how people's personal data is used. If it's concentrated, can it create privacy and security risks if it's not handled well enough? We also need to take better care to create and adhere to safeguards which follow international or national standards to ensure that data theft is prevented and to ensure that there's no undue modification of data. We know also that AI systems create issues of sustainability due to their consumption of natural resources throughout their value chain. So this isn't just about the data that's generated, but it's about the environmental impact that that data has. So data centers, the ones which hold onto the data, have a carbon footprint of about 20 megatons of carbon dioxide. Now in 2015, that already represented 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So you can imagine how that number has increased with the expansion of data that's been collected since that period of time. We know from one study that the full training of an AI model with 6 billion parameters was estimated to be equivalent to burning a railway carload of coal. That might not sound very much in itself, but again, let's come back to ChatGPT. So the current version that people are being able to use, ChatGPT 3.5, has 175 billion parameters, and that's the equivalent. So powering that is the equivalent to taking up the monthly power supply of a small city. So we've got some quite serious environmental concerns around AI and around its future use and expansion that we need to take into account when we know that we already have a climate crisis going on. One of the ways that we can deal with some of these challenges is by really increasing our attention to artificial intelligence ethics. By that, I mean a set of values, principles, and techniques that employ widely accepted standards of right and wrong to guide moral conduct in the development and use of AI technologies. So at UNESCO, we've already been doing some work on the ethics of artificial intelligence. In November 2021, all UNESCO member states approved the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. You can see a picture of the cover of the recommendation. It's available free to everybody in all of the 6 official UNESCO languages, and it can be accessed for free from UNESCO's digital library, UNESCO. So the aim with the recommendation is to provide a foundation so that AI systems work for the betterment of individuals and societies, for the good of the environment and ecosystems, to prevent harm from or by AI. And this year, around 50 countries have been working with UNESCO to actually map out the recommendation into a framework to assess what's happening in their countries as well. So this isn't just a static document. This is some work which is ongoing, and it's been deemed to be extremely important. So what then is the future of artificial intelligence and education? First, let's think, before getting into the education specifics, what could we expect next in the development of artificial intelligence? And I should be very clear and say that we're not trying to predict the future at UNESCO. We've been watching and doing research over the past 3 years on some of the trends in artificial intelligence and higher education. But I think when we come to the technology itself, with the tools itself, we might see 2 things. The first is, as we've seen with the rapid popularization of ChatGPT, and of course other tools as well, I'm only mentioning ChatGPT because it's the one that most people have heard about. So I think we could expect to see more AI applications that are user-friendly in the same way that ChatGPT has been. It's free, you can access this in most countries, you can type into it in different languages and so on. So I expect we'll see a lot more tools developing in that way. The other possibility is that we achieve human-level artificial intelligence, which is also called artificial general intelligence. What we have at the moment, all of the AI that we have is known as artificial narrow intelligence, ANI. Now, nobody is, of course, able to put a finger on and say exactly when this might happen, but many experts agree that this is something that may take place within the next 50 years or so. Now, even if that's not within your lifespan, it is in the lifespan of your children, of your students, of their children, and of the generations of students to come. So this is also something I think for us to look out for. Now, in the nearer future, we're already seeing shifts in job postings. So we can expect to continue to see more jobs in artificial intelligence fields. On the graph here, you can see some data from selected Western countries about the percentage of jobs in AI relative to other fields. And you can see in almost all countries, the number of those jobs that are available in AI has increased between 2014 and 2022. We know, for example, that machine learning specialists are among the most highly demanded specialists at the moment. So there's an increased demand for AI knowledge and skills in the labour market. So for us in education, what should we be teaching our students, and what should we perhaps be learning for ourselves and supporting the general public to learn? Well, I think there are some transversal skills that we can think about for this era of artificial intelligence. The first two relate to artificial intelligence. So that's teaching basic AI or data literacy. It's also, as I've mentioned before, teaching about AI ethics, which is really important that we get forward. But the other skills that we think are going to be important for this era are not technological skills. These are skills to do with critical thinking, creativity, emotional intelligence, teamwork, problem solving, collaboration, and leadership. These are the kind of skills that everybody is going to need to have in order to be able to understand, for example, what's fake news and what's not. What are the basic principles of how an AI tool works, and therefore how can we judge whether or not it's going to be something that's useful for us. So in that sense, I think we will see some changes in how education works because of the development of AI. We may see some lower level job tasks. That could be data entry, it could be grading, giving marks for assessments and so on, replaced by AI tools. It's possible that some job roles may be lost as others that require higher level skills are added. One estimate suggests that around 300 million jobs, or 2/3 of existing jobs, could be susceptible, not lost, but susceptible to some level of AI automation. But as mentioned, it's our expectation that AI will complement high-skilled jobs, not replace them. High-skilled professionals will have more time for innovation, creativity, reasoning, and the interpersonal aspects of work, basically all the things that artificial intelligence can't do. We might expect to see in the governance of education that data-informed decision-making will become more prominent. And we also think that most organizations will need to buy in AI tools which are developed by private companies. And that's significant to mention because of the commercialization aspect. It also makes us aware of our own need to be educated and informed about how these tools work, about the data that they're built on, how that data is used, how the data is collected, so that we can make an informed decision about whether such a tool is actually going to be beneficial for our education organizations, for our educational systems. So we need to have technical and ethical expertise. Education leaders in particular, school principals, university rectors, policymakers, need to be equipped to take forward responsible implementation of AI. This is going to require upskilling, it's going to require capacity development, which in turn needs the investment of time and resources. And that's not only for leadership. What we need to be in is a position where the reach of AI extends to everybody, teachers, staff, students. So everybody has at least a basic understanding of how artificial intelligence works and how it can be used to improve education. And there need to, for that needs to be backed up by policies and guidelines on the use of AI, particularly in teaching, learning and assessment. So to wrap up, before we move to the Q&A segment, AI is a fast-moving concept and reality. It can impact all aspects of higher education. Those are the examples that I've given today, but of course, other levels of education as well. It's absolutely crucial to take informed, ethical, responsible, and inclusive approaches to artificial intelligence. As I've just mentioned, a really key issue, not only in the immediate future, but actually right now, is the need for education leadership and policy leadership to be equipped to take forward the responsible implementation of AI. For AI to be effective, its reach should extend well beyond the current situation. At the moment, too few people know what AI is, and too many people rush into the hype or the fear that's surrounding the public discourse at the moment. So hopefully now, you, having watched this presentation today, will not be one of those and will be the ones that have a bit more understanding about how AI works and how it can be used in the educational process, and what are some of the concerns and the risks and challenges that come with that. As I mentioned at the beginning, I want to say again, coming out in September 2023, UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education is publishing a major new publication on artificial intelligence. It's a primer on artificial intelligence and higher education. It covers so much more than I've been able to talk about in today's lecture. It includes a practical guide with step-by-step ideas and activities for education institutions looking to adapt and integrate artificial intelligence in an ethical and responsible way. And it also includes recommendations. So look out for that. It will be available for free in UNESCO's digital library in September 2023. So some time now, for some of the questions that you've asked. As I mentioned, I think we've already covered several of the questions in the course of the presentation, but I want to pick out a couple more questions just to finish with. So let's start with some questions that you had about national policies on artificial intelligence and education. So what are the recommendations for the Ministry of Education about regulating and developing or using the potential of AI? Does AI present a threat to the quality of education? And when will Kyrgyzstan introduce the use of AI in the educational process? So these are some really great questions, I think. Some of the parts of the presentation have already addressed some aspect of that. But I want to share with you that Kyrgyzstan is not alone in this journey. The need to create a conducive policy environment for AI is really very high. UNESCO did a survey earlier this year of just over 450 education institutions around the world and found that only 13% of universities had some kind of guidance about the use of AI. And 20% of the respondents couldn't even say whether or not their higher education institution had issued policies or guidance on the use of AI. So what that shows is that we have this lack of understanding and agility on the side of institutions, and that has risks then of unplanned implications of AI use in relation to safety, knowledge diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for the Ministry of Education, I would say this creation of a policy environment and support for education institutions is absolutely pivotal. So I've said it before, and I'll say it again, AI won't replace teachers, but in this new era, teachers need more support specifically around AI, and that would be another recommendation for ministries of education. Because schools and universities are going to be training the next generations of AI specialists. They'll be providing more general education, both to students, but also to members of the community about AI ethics, about AI and data literacy. And the teaching of meta skills, like critical thinking, like creativity, is most likely to be mainstreamed in order, as I've mentioned before, to support students and others to be able to understand and thrive in this artificial intelligence era. So for that, policymakers and educational leaders will need to provide or develop resources to introduce AI, to train on AI ethics, whether that's workshops, training events, or other things. This needs to be contextualized because it needs to take into account what are the local regulations, what is the local context. This can be done using internal or external trusted sources. You could use MOOCs, these massive open online courses. At UNESCO, ISAUC, at the International Institute for Higher Education, we've developed an open access course on ChatGPT in higher education. You're very welcome to sign up to take that as a way of improving your own professional development in this area. And it's going to be very important to create opportunities, not just for teachers, but for all stakeholders in educational processes to discuss the impact of AI and to be involved in decision-making. When we're thinking about those policy areas, so the main ones that are going to be affected by artificial intelligence relate to academic integrity, research ethics, and transparency and accountability. So in academic integrity in higher education, for example, universities and institutes will need to establish policies and regulations to ensure fair and ethical academic practices. That might include guidelines on preventing plagiarism. It might be about detecting AI-generated content. It could be about ensuring AI technologies are used appropriately in student assessments. When it comes to research ethics, guidelines need to be established to ensure the ethical use of AI in research. This could relate to privacy issues, data security, bias mitigation, and transparency, which makes up the third area here. It's very important for policymakers, for leaders, to make sure that there are clear explanations of how AI technologies are used within institutions and why they're being used, to know the data sources that have been selected, to understand the decision-making processes that have gone into those. Because at the moment we have a lack of national and international regulation and guidance. So in May this year, the founder of ChatGPT even called for more regulatory intervention. And as you can see from this screenshot here, over 30,000 academic and private sector leaders have signed a public letter calling for a pause in the development of training powerful AI systems. These developments are happening so fast that it may be time to call a halt temporarily so that regulation and guidance can catch up. Some countries, such as China, have already drafted regulations to steer artificial intelligence. Others, like the UK, are publishing guidance later this year. So this is now happening very fast, but I think this is still an area where policymakers are recommended to focus their attention. Multilateral bodies such as UNESCO, such as the OECD, the European Union, have been drafting various rules and legal frameworks around the use of AI. I've already talked about UNESCO's really important work on the ethics of AI. So these initiatives are there, but they are still developing. So again, for policymakers, I think this is really important information. So final set of questions. I've just mentioned academic integrity, but a couple of great questions here. So one, if AI can combine fake information, what efforts by the scientific and educational community can protect students from false knowledge? And if in education institutions in the former USSR, ethical and academic standards are only slowly being introduced, what additional norms and procedures are Western educational institutions introducing in order to maintain academic ethics and the quality of teaching? So again, I think some of these issues have come up in the context of the presentation. I would say that rather than banning the use of artificial intelligence in order to maintain academic integrity, let's look at other ways. Let's look at how we could adapt to AI, in this case, in assessment. So you can find now other software tools that can check for AI-generated text. Before going into that realm, I call back to the previous point made about considering why AI tools are being used, to what end, and how they're going to help educational processes. We don't want to end up in a situation where students are using, for example, ChatGPT or some other tool, and then we have a plagiarism detector checking for AI written text, and then who knows, in the future, maybe we need another tool to check on the plagiarism detector tool. So we'd be piling tool upon tool upon tool. I think rather than that, perhaps we could rethink for example, how we do exam-based assessments. Those of you who grew up in the former USSR will be very familiar with oral assessments. That might be a way that we can avoid getting into whether text has been plagiarized or not. We could look at doing handwritten or invigilated formats of assessment. I think it's also important to consider assessment types that are difficult for AI tools to produce. That could be podcasts, lab activities, group work, reflections. We could grade students' participation. We could use scaffolded assignments where we see the students' work develop over the course of a program or a course of study. And again, I've mentioned a couple of times, but it's really important that guidelines are updated to allow the use of AI tools in assessments. Sometimes that could be with conditions. So, for example, you could tell students that they may use AI tools to support their planning, but AI-generated text may not be used in final outputs. Or it might be that AI tools are permitted to support writing, but their usage must be disclosed, much as in higher education we require students to cite their sources correctly and not to plagiarize other sources. And we might get even more creative and think about how could we use AI tools to create new forms of assessment altogether. So these are some of the ways I think we could adapt to AI and assessment. And I think we can also hold on to some of these ideas about how AI could transform not just assessment, but learning and teaching in general. We've talked about personalized learning. We've talked about the possibility of virtual reality and augmented reality, particularly when it comes to experiential learning and to increasing access to educational opportunities. I think chatbots, as I've mentioned, are going to be one of the ways that we'll see AI tools being integrated into education fairly rapidly to provide information primarily. And perhaps universities and other education stakeholders will begin to train their own generative AI tools to assist students within local contexts. So, as I've mentioned, in terms of assessment, rather than banning AI tools, let's think about how we can adapt to or integrate artificial intelligence into evaluations and how we might identify alternative assessment methods. So that brings us to the end of the lecture. Thank you very much for your attention. I should assure you as well, by the way, that I am not AI generated. I'm fully human. I've really enjoyed being with you. I hope you have an excellent conference. Thank you very much.